So good to be with you all this morning. It's been a minute since I've been out here, and it's good to see all your faces again. Hey, this might not sound like fun, but let's do 2020 in review. We're coming to a close, and I promise it'll be encouraging at the end. Okay. 2020. Wow, what a year, huh? Most people would like to forget it. It started out with some major bushfires there in Australia, and we were like, oh man, poor Australia. And there was looming on the horizon this thing that was coming out of China, and can we shut things down fast enough? And then, we didn't quite shut things down fast enough, and it got over here. And we had to lock down for a minute. Nobody liked that. We stopped meeting as a church face to face, and that was frustrating and discouraging for a lot of us. Not getting out, not getting to go to work like we'd like to anyway, getting out and seeing family or distancing from them. And then they said, yeah, you can get out, but everybody wear a mask, but I don't want to wear a mask. And so, but I tried to humble myself a little bit, and so we wear masks. And that's okay. And then after locking us up for a couple of months, a guy named George Floyd died at the knee of an officer, and it was tragic. But that sparked some major political things all over the country, especially in the major metropolitan areas. And there's still stuff going on in Portland about that and other things. And there were what was called race riots, kind of like we saw back in the 60s, right? I wasn't alive at that time, but I've heard the stories of the things that happened back then. Let me just pause here for a second before we continue. I got to say this. Family, there is no such thing as race. There are human beings. There are human beings. There is no race. That is something that is man-made, right? Color of the skin doesn't matter. So when you say you're of a different race, please don't ever say that around me. I'm a different race than you. No, you're not. You're a human being. You're a human being. Okay, let's continue on. And so that was tragic. That was tragic and still is tragic. And the different things that have occurred with that. Oh, and then there were the murder hornets. You remember those? And all of these weird things that started happening in 2020 that it was bizarre. This has been a bizarre year. And then there was all of this political stuff recently that were, who's going to win the presidential election? And now it's being contested. And how's that going to work out? Is it going to work out? And then we find that there's some major foreign influences that are potentially on our borders even. That's a scary thing. That's a scary thing. Right? And then you add in my personal stuff to it, and you fill in your personal stuff with this, right? Because I know, and I'm specifically bringing this out to Luke because I know this isn't going anywhere else. I'm not going to reuse this sermon because this is for you today. I know that it's been a mess for you, and it's been hard. And it's been challenging because of all of the different individual things that the body has experienced here with their extended family and within the family themselves. I get it. I hear it. I don't understand it all. I don't. But you know that I had my mess too. Where I went to visit Dad because it could have been his last moments, and it turns out it was. But we got to spend some wonderful time with him before he passed. While we were up there, that's when the major fires up in the Northwest were happening, and we saw the smoke. It looked like a really bad day in Lubbock or Loop, with the winds blowing, but it was smoke instead of dirt, and going on all throughout that. And came back, and I don't know that most people know this, but my uncle passed about a month ago. Right after that, this is my mother's last living brother. Passed, and he was on hospice for a long time. And you have your own stories in this as well. And it's easy to get very discouraged. It's easy to get very discouraged and downtrodden, thinking to ourselves, what next? is everything crumbling around me. And the storms of life, they're pushing in on you. And you begin to wonder, what else can I endure? Every single storm that pops up, what else can I endure? And so I want to spend some time with you this morning in Hebrews chapter 12. Because I think it speaks right into who we are and where we are. Hebrews is an incredible book. It's actually meant to be read out loud. Talking about the glorification of Jesus and all of the things that he has done for us by the completing work that he did there on the cross. And that you should trust in him because he's worthy of your trust, and he is important enough because of the things that he established on that day as he was up there dying. The things that he accomplished for us. We finally get to Hebrews chapter 12, but I want to introduce it like this. If you haven't heard this in a minute, you need to. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, for by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called out to go to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in a land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received a power to conceive when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as innumerable as the grains of sand by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on earth. For people who speak thus, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land which they had gone, from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country. That is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. And by faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch him. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. And by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, of Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of the fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in the dens and caves of the earth. And all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. There's your introduction to 12. Let it affect you. You are not alone in your suffering. You have a great cloud of witnesses that our Hebrew author is about to talk about, and what they did and how you are to respond to the circumstances that are around you. Listen, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? Pause there for a second. He's saying, look to Jesus, who in his righteous faith endured all of the shame and the opposition of mankind for you, for me. You're not yet in that position. So keep enduring. So keep going. Lift your head up and keep going. He didn't set it aside. Don't set it aside. He says, my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines the ones he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom the Father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Have you stopped to consider? We brought this up in class this morning. Have you stopped to consider that the trials that you and I and all of us have been through, some that are particular to you, some that are experienced by all, are disciplinary actions. Not because necessarily you've done anything wrong, but because God wants to instill something more profound in you and inside of me than has existed there before. Our Hebrew author says that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Because if he wasn't disciplining you, it would say, you're not legitimate sons of mine. Besides this, we've had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may, catch this, share his holiness. Talk about that here again in just a moment. And the grandeur of what our Hebrew author is trying to share with us about why God disciplines us. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, lift your drooping hands, strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Right? Again, in class we talked about this a little bit. Disciplining my sons, right? When I see a behavior that I don't want to see in them, I'll move them in a direction, and if that doesn't work, we have to scale it up a little bit, right? It's parenting. We all get that. Do they understand always? They don't understand sometimes the extreme nature of the discipline or why it's happening in that moment. But our hope is that as parents, that we want our children to become productive members of society, good Christian men and women, and so we discipline them. He says, when God disciplines you, don't resist it. Don't resist it. Make straight paths, right? Get back on track. Make straight paths. Verse 14. I think this is important. Strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. Strive for peace with everyone. Does that mean that I'm going to have peace with everyone? Not necessarily, right? But I'm going to strive for peace with everyone. I can especially see this in this world that I'm living in right now, right? I want to be a listener. I want to be an understander. I want to be a hearer of who you are and what's going on in your life and your mind and the struggles and maybe the offense that you have against me. And I want to do things that can correct that if at all possible. Sometimes it's not possible. But I want to strive for that peace and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. There's that word again, the holiness. Almost there. We'll talk about it in a second. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness, right? The anger that grows inside of you, the vileness that bubbles up inside of us sometimes when we're holding something against someone. Make sure that's cut out. That no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. That no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. Ladies and gentlemen, you remember that story. Jacob and Esau, right? Jacob, the trickster, tricks his brother out of his birthright with a bowl of soup. With a bowl of soup. He gave everything up for a bowl of soup. Don't you give up on this Jesus for a bowl of soup. Don't sell out for something that is not eternal for that which is eternal. Do not grow weary and lose heart. Don't sell it. Now is a time to pursue in faith rather than to set your faith aside. When he desired a single meal. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further message be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. You know what they're recalling, what he's recalling here, our author is recalling, is that time at Mount Sinai, there in Exodus chapter 19, when God descends on the mountain in smoke and fire, makes the commandments, don't touch it, otherwise you die. Why is that? Is it because God is a jerk? Right? No, there's something fundamentally different about God. One of the best analogies, and I probably even used it here, that best metaphors that we can talk about that helps us to understand this, is that glowing ball that is usually out in the sky, even though it might be a little eclipsed right now. That glowing ball that's out in the sky is 93 million miles away, right? Even if the world were a million miles closer to it, everything would be incinerated. Does that mean, is that because the sun is evil? Is that because the sun is a jerk and just wants to destroy things? No, it's because we're fundamentally different than it. Even if I go outside for too long, and especially with my pale skin, and I don't have the appropriate clothing on, it will hurt me, right? Even at the right distance away. But the sun is good. We have to have it. We have to have it, and we appreciate it. We enjoy it. So is God such different than us. Right? It's not that he's bad, it's just that he's holy and we're not holy. And that's what holiness is about. But he says, I want to give that to you. Isaiah experienced that in Isaiah chapter 6. He's in an ecstatic dream, a vision type scenario where he's put into the throne room of God and he sees the hem of God's robe. And there are these crazy beings that are around him, the seraphim, right? And his reaction to that is a very appropriate one to the holiness of God. It is this: I am destroyed. I'm destroyed. Right? But then this crazy alien-like creature grabs a coal and sears his lip and says, you've been made pure. Right? The paradigm shift is there. Now I can be in the presence of God. And this is what Jesus does for us. Right? Don't miss this. This is what Jesus does for us. As he dies on the cross, it is like that being coming and searing us and making us holy. The curtain rips in the temple, and the holiness of God is accessible by the people that have been made holy through Christ. So you've not come to that mountain. You've not come to the bottom of Mount Sinai where you're so different and so other that you can't even touch it. You've come to a different mountain. Verse 22, you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns us from heaven. At that time, his voice shook the earth. But now he has promised, yet once more, I will not shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. Don't miss it. The world that is around you is shakeable. This flesh is shakeable. This country is shakeable. And when the proverbial earthquake comes, sometimes those things crumble. Welcome to 2020. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken. That is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. Christian, you are part of an unshakable kingdom.
Amen.
A kingdom that will not crumble ever. Cling to that hope and endure what is before you. You get to spend eternity with the King. This is an important place for me. I'm talking about this specifically here. You are an important place for me. Because of the courage that you give me through your encouragement. Hopefully, I am able to do somewhat of the same thing for you. This is what family is. This is part of kingdom life right here. Let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. The storms of life are all around you, and whether or not we can see them, they're very evident right here, right now, but on a spiritual level, it's no different than it has ever been. That I know of. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe there's something going on that I don't know about. That's a possibility. But the fact remains that I'm a part of an unshakable kingdom, and those storms do not affect me the same way that they have a tendency to affect the rest of the world. Consider Job as we close out, right? Job went through some storms in his life, didn't he? All at once, he lost everything, basically. I know that's a paraphrase, but pretty much all at once, he lost everything. And he questioned God about all of these storms. Why am I experiencing these storms? Why did I have to go through them? I didn't sin. I need to meet with you, God. And finally, God does descend and talk with Job. Out of a storm. Takes him on this wondrous journey throughout all of the cosmos and asks him these poignant questions that he has no answer to about how he created, how he did things. Do you know where this is? Do you know where that is? And you know this Leviathan creature that has been established throughout all of the mythology that is there in the oceans that I created? Can you touch him? You can't put a fish hook in him. If you just saw him, you would never forget it. And after experiencing the storm of God, you know what Job's response was, right? I'm humbled to the point of putting my hand over my mouth. And in essence, says this. 2 storms. One stirs me up. One calms my soul. Endure. Be calm, because God has it all in order. If you need anything this morning, especially if you need to have the peace that I'm talking about and want to put your Lord, Jesus on as your Lord and Savior in baptism, man, we want to be here for you with that, walk you through that, even if you're not quite ready at this moment, if you want to hear more. Or if you have another prayer that we haven't shared out loud, we're going to sing this song. If you have a need, would you come while we stand and sing?